Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This is going to be first in a kind of series of videos I do in the build up to The Dragon Prince Season 4, which is coming out November 3rd, I believe. This is going to be me doing a rewatch of the first 3 seasons ahead of the release of Season 4. So this first video here will be the discussion, the re-review basically of Book 1, Moon. Then next week we'll do book 2. Week after that we'll do book 3, and then I'll try to get some sort of a video out in the days leading up to the release of season 4. That is some sort of speculation, thoughts on some of the little short stories they've put out, and so on as we head into the new season, because it has been quite a while. That's, I think, why it's sort of, good, I think, to do a rewatch ahead of time, because it's 3 years. It's 3 years since the last book came out. And you realize, looking back on it, that book 1 compared to like the book 3 premiere was like 14 months. But now it's been 36 months and we're just about getting back on track. Now, we should be in a situation going forward. I think they've said it at both panels, SDCC and NYCC, that there won't be a giant wait before season 5 and season 6, which I think are both in the current phase of the show. I think they're going to do 3, and then as far as we're aware, the 7th and sort of final season is on its own, and there'll be a larger build up to that one again. But 4, 5, and 6 are going to be grouped very similarly to the way 1, 2, and 3 are grouped. And that's the interesting point of this. Going back to book 1, is that you almost forget, after 3 apparently whole seasons, you almost forget how small the seasons of Dragon Prince are. They're only 9 episodes, and to me, in no way does book 1 really feel like a particularly contained story at all, because the ending, for instance, is such a cliffhanger kind of point that, sure, the egg hatching, meeting Zim for the first time, is a notable point. But the cliffhanger is that Soren and Claudia have located them, basically, which to me isn't it doesn't feel like a between season kind of cliffhanger thing. And it just highlights that the content for the Dragon Prince we have so far is 27 episodes, which is just a slightly longer than usual normal season of a show. Some shows have 20, a lot have had 26 before. So 27 is a little bit longer, but it highlights that we haven't, in a way, had that much Dragon Prince overall, when you look at it that way. And so this first 9 episodes definitely serves as the introduction, and I think it shows you the potential that the show has, and they really fulfill that in, I think, season 2 and 3 with what they do. And this is where the kind of production approach that they take with this show works in its favor, where I think we know that they basically worked on book 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. They've worked on book 4, 5, and 6 at the same time, and it allows them to have the content work very nicely, basically like it is just one giant season to itself. And that's why, this is book 1, 2, and 3 are The Dragon Prince. Book 4, 5, and 6 are going to be The Dragon Prince, The Mystery of Erebos. And then we'll have a different subtitle for the final season. And that's more of what it feels like. It's just this one giant section of the story that altogether happens to be split into thirds. So, getting into it, I suppose, a little bit more detail. I think the main thing to me that sort of stands out as, I would say, a criticism of the first book is probably just that, you realize that, the animation was a bit of a problem back when it first came out. Now, thankfully, they listened to what was pretty universal feedback from the fans and did make the decision to improve or change the animation to kind of counter that criticism going into book 2 and 3 onwards. And I like that. I think it was a good thing from the show to show that it was willing to listen to fans when there was a point that wasn't just people being nitpicky. It was a complaint that a large amount of people had. And I think they just accepted that, okay, artistically we wanted to try something here, but we see in reflection, practically that hasn't quite worked. The vision of whatever that the intent with that animation style was hasn't quite come to fruition. But people, I think in general, like the art style, and in sections the actual like animation fluidity was good. It was just their decisions with some of how they did this definitely didn't make for that great of a kind of viewing experience. Now, is it noticeable on rewatch? Yes, at certain points it is. There are definitely whole kind of sequences of episodes where you'll go like a couple of minutes without noticing it, but then all of a sudden there'll be that one sort of kind of like specific scene from a certain distance where the characters are making relatively subtle motion, where it just feels like that, kind of frame rate kind of crawls to a halt, and it seems very, very choppy and clunky, and it kind of feels like, how did that shot get approved looking like that versus how certain other shots actually look overall. But it was just one of those things where it's a very noticeable just, I think this can be fixed. And I think the fact that I haven't really seen people complain about the animation since book one shows you that, okay, they just kind of, in a way, took the L on that one, changed it, and ultimately, did it really affect that much of their artistic intent? Not really, but they made the show a lot more watchable going forward. Otherwise, I think a lot of people always make the point with this that it feels like Avatar. If you like Avatar, you'll like this show. And the reasoning behind that ultimately is that this show, it feels like it has the same approach as Avatar when it comes to plotting, and especially when it comes to characters. It makes an effort to make the characters feel unique, that they will go on arcs that see, like every scene that the character is in, it feels like is referencing some aspect of their character in some way, and then when they interact with other characters, different aspects of it will come out, and straight away you get that. Like, you see what Callum is like, what Ezran is like, but then Rayla comes in and she's a different character, but the interaction and kind of like banter that the characters have together works to allow a kind of odd group of three characters to come together as our main sort of hero group for this story. And obviously that's the main premise here, is that we have the two sides of the world, the human side, the Zadian side, basically magic and sort of non-magic effectively, and how do we deal with this world that is basically torn in two, effectively on the basis of humans aren't, it doesn't seem like inherently connected to magic, but they would like that. And it is interesting because since this came out, we did of course get like the novelizations for at least two of the three books, and in the first one you get a little bit of extra lore about like how the kind of unicorns helped the humans and stuff like that, and that was a kind of interesting point. So there's some like nuance to the backstory, of course, and it gets referenced as we go through the different books. But it's an interesting setup because at least the way they quickly state it to you here, you sort of see, okay, there's the conflict of like, yes, they seem to have half of the world, but humans develop this sort of form of magic themselves, but it sacrifices, magical creatures to do it, and they look down on humans because of that. And you kind of wonder like, why is it that way? Why are humans kind of separate to that ultimately? And especially knowing with the direction that they take with, say, Callum, for example, in that he eventually basically gains, like, we'll go over it, I think it's more of a season 2 plot point, but the idea that he can use magic without a primal stone, and he can do it like a more typical mage. And what does that mean? What does that suggest? Is an interesting idea. And yeah, you can see the wars happened, and I like the references even early on, that because they basically only tell you the backstory in season 2 and 3, they jump in here and you get reference to the idea that the humans killed the dragon, the king of the dragons, and they destroyed the egg, the dragon prince, and that the inciting event at the start of this season is revenge for that is very, very interesting, because probably one of the most interesting aspects of this season is definitely the Viren and Harrow dynamic, which then sets Viren on his path as a character. And I like that they don't give you the full groundwork, at least in this first season, to work with on why exactly there is this weird sense of like they used to be super, super close, but now there's a little bit of a distance between them because of the events from the past. And I love that if you are familiar with what happens in season 2 and 3, you have all the context you need to know why that is. That Harrow is, there's a little bit of kind of fear there because he knows they're coming for him. That because of what happened with the Dragon King, this is the revenge for that. And he knows that it's him specifically that is being targeted, basically a king for a king. And he, obviously rightfully so, is kind of afraid, frustrated by this, especially when Viren, the solution that he offers is effectively the same type of solution that kind of got them into this mess ultimately. Now there's nuance to that situation because obviously in season 2 and 3 we get the backstory of like the human kingdoms were suffering, and so they had to use the kind of heart of a magical creature to kind of fix things ultimately, and this prompted kind of what happened, of course. So it's an interesting thing. It sort of starts a cycle of kind of revenge, hatred back and forth, but it gets across the idea that Viren has these ideas that can fix things, but it is very much by leaning into the sort of like human stolen magic aspect that seems to almost cause more harm than it's worth. But like he says, he is a practical character, and he's almost frustrated by Harrow for maybe not being practical in this situation. So that gets into the whole double-headed snake thing and the idea that it can steal souls, and this is a good way that we can save you from this assassination attempt, because they just accept that Harrow's going to die. I like in a way how they're just so kind of clear about that. They know that Harrow is not going to make it through this. So the only way to really in any way save him would be to go through with this. But as far as I'm aware, on what I've seen, the creators have just come out and effectively just said, no, Harrow is dead. And my thoughts on that would be that, like, it's a cool theory, of course, the whole idea that he was soul swapped with the bird, so Harrow's soul is actually in the bird, and it was actually, like, I suppose the bird's soul that died in Harrow's body. But my thoughts are that the assassination binding band on the elves wouldn't come off for Harrow if his sort of soul didn't, like, die. That's kind of my thoughts on that. So I just feel there's that sort of sense of, like, kind of the magic would know the correct, like, identity, that they set out on this mission to kill King and Prince, Harrow and Ezran. And if they just killed Harrow's body with the bird's soul in it, is that fulfilling the condition of the band? I don't think so. Now, it could just be the creators trying to put us off the scent on a very kind of clear-cut theory that basically everyone has. But I think in the context of what happens in later seasons, I think this very much is meant to be Harrow refusing one of Viren's, like, magical interventions. And I don't think Viren, like, kind of forces this to happen. We'll see if they do anything with it, because as we'll get into, there's another kind of, like, magical soul-stealing kind of type power that we also need to talk about with him. But yeah, the core sort of, in a way, premise of the show here, what really makes it sort of exciting is obviously that they find that the Dragon Prince is actually alive. The egg is still there, and whatever's inside is still alive and can potentially hatch at some point in the future. Again, knowing what happens into the future, it's very interesting to know the context of, like, Viren saves this effectively, because of Rayla's parents, and then that sort of leads you into the whole idea of like, well, he has a bunch of those coins with people trapped in them. We assume it's her parents are also coins as well as Runan. So that's interesting, and of course, Ezran finds it, Callum discovers it, and then Rayla finds it too. And so what immediately is, I have to fulfill my job as an assassin here, turns into, like, you see Rayla's sort of like optimism, that she has hope for peace between humans and elves, and the boys do too. That they both immediately latch onto the idea that the egg can be this symbol of peace. It can stop this cycle of us both attacking each other back and forth. And I suppose it's because, okay, ultimately both kings are dead, but we can go on from here, with the idea that the princes are like the hope for the future. And I like that idea, that the adults seem closed off to a certain degree, but that the kids are the ones who can actually like see the better future for everything. And that's it. That is basically what we get. You obviously get like Rayla's arc as the assassin who can't bring herself to kill, and is that good or bad? There's maybe some sense that, like, I suppose, especially with the most recent comic in line, do you quite get the sense that Runan is like this kind of father figure to Rayla? Like a little bit, but maybe not as strong as later content kind of makes it out to be. But we'll get there when we meet other characters in the kind of coming books. But Rayla's arc is good, and so it's basically just her dealing with interacting with kind of humans for the first time. There's an element of the kind of, the truth about what the bands and stuff like that actually mean, and knowing if the father is dead or not. But the core thing that she actually does have to deal with over the course of the book is the other one. She is not going to kill Ezran, so she's sort of accepted that she's going to lose an arm, a hand, unless they can find some way to cut it. And so there is a bit of an arc throughout the book about the idea of like, can she get that thing off? And ultimately nothing like just normally physical works. Not even a magical Sunforged dagger does it. But in an interesting reveal, a newborn dragon can actually just bite through it and get rid of it, highlighting just the extent of the magic within a dragon, that it can actually just kind of bite something like that off. Callum is interesting because you almost forget little things like the idea that Callum's like biological father remains like a mystery within the show with regards to like, is there something going on there, especially given the like potential of Callum as a character, as a mage. It's fascinating to know that like something is going on there, and I'd like to know if they'll ever come back to that, or if that character's just meant to remain like an unknown in the series. But the whole dynamic of him and his involvement in the family, him still being a prince, it is nicely done with regards to like Harrow still absolutely treats him as a son. The brotherly relationship between Callum and Ezran is very well done over the course of the book. The only, I suppose, in a way, writing kind of specific point I'd criticize would be, I think they write Callum to be needlessly harsh when it comes to his not believing that Ezran can talk to animals. Given just the characterization of Callum up to that point, it's just a little bit weird to see him suddenly be like, I don't believe you, and he just like double, triple, quadrupled down on that point. Now, it's obviously to set up the whole idea of he has to do the jerk face dance when he's proven wrong. But it was just a little too drama focused, given that it gets resolved like relatively quickly afterwards. And so, yeah, their arc of just kind of going through, finding some way to kind of bring the Dragon Prince back, In the first place, like, it leads up to the whole idea of the egg gets kind of what's supposed to say, like what's inside the egg gets damaged when it goes under the ice for a while, so they have to find some way to kind of fix it, heal it, so they have to go up the cursed caldera. I know I like the Ellis and Ava kind of story as like the kind of setup for why they know to go there, sort of like at all in the first place. It maybe takes a little bit too long for the whole mystery of like all the animals are illusions to come out. Given that like they spend quite a while setting up what the plan is going to be when they face it, then the actual action scene takes quite a while, and so on. That's maybe the one part of the book that just feels a little bit stretched out. But once they get to Lujain and they reveal what they revealed there, I think it works out quite nicely in the idea of like they move to immediately hatch Zim out of the egg using the primal stone, of like kind of Callum giving up this thing that kind of he views as being the only reason he has any power. Is an interesting point, because he obviously has that conversation with Ellis about it, that like, oh, he's surprisingly confident about this, but he does view it as that this stone is like the only thing that gives him that power. But she notes that no, the stone doesn't inherently do anything on its own unless you do it yourself. So him learning spells is a good thing, it's just that he needs a source to kind of make that work ultimately. So and again, that's an arc that they go into kind of coming up, of course, and the whole like Callum uses some dark magic and stuff like that they begin to get into, and the whole what's it, like arcanums idea, which I hope we explore a little bit more going forward with regards to like, you know, how many more is Callum going to learn, and again the whole, will they explain a little bit more about humans not being magical inherently and what that exactly means. Speaking of magic, I suppose Aravos, it's very interesting that going back to just book one, Aravos doesn't really come up. Now the setup for Aravos begins to come up because of course the mirror gets brought in, and Runan basically just says that like this is worse than death, like what this means will lead to. But we don't actually get into any of it just right now. And I almost forgot that. I forgot the extent of which, like, basically how far the Viren stuff goes. And more of the villainous Viren stuff is just, you know, his lies, manipulations, and then what he does to Runan is more of the actual, like, Viren stuff that happens here. And I think that's, again, what makes him such a fascinating character, and why I'm so interested with him specifically going into the coming books of like, can he redeem himself? Is that even the idea that they're going to go on from here on out? Because obviously we know Aravos is going to be a part of this, and so it's all going to be about, has Viren just full on been used by Aravos and there's no connection there whatsoever, so will he want to redeem himself or not? Because the three books kind of end with his, what seems like, you know, defeat, in that like he dies and has to be like resurrected as is the setup for the book. I'm eager to see what happens there, but otherwise you just see that this is this guy who is kind of frustrated by a lot of the kind of rules that are in place, the kind of pride of Harrow and stuff like that. So he will do what he feels needs to be done. And, you know, he's called arrogant, and there's definitely some sense of that. It comes from what seems to be a generally, like, decent place of wanting to help and improve humanity, but it's the lens that he will go through to have his idea be correct. That's what makes the character, I think, so interesting. And just that sense of like, do you not realize like that at least some aspect of what you're doing is wrong, and if you just turned back at this point it would be so much better for you. So ending book one with like him kind of infected basically by the dark magic after just capturing another soul here is a kind of a notable kind of point to kind of get into. But then this is obviously going to lead into the idea of he is effectively considering himself to be the next leader, the next king, and the kind of, again, the situation he's going to get into, the desperation, and what will he turn to what extent will he turn to get what he needs. And this is the whole Aravos kind of manipulation and setup arc, ultimately. I suppose one thing I do want to mention, but like say Ezran, it's always, I think, a little bit of a risk when you have a character who is like that young, placed in a main position, if you can do that characterization well enough. I think with Ezran they got it right, where right now he is young, so he's not going to be the most useful character in any particular situation, but he does have a fun character to him. He gets to have his own kind of little character arc moments, and just stuff like the reveal of what him being able to talk to animals meant, and how it maybe meant that his connection with other human characters wasn't maybe as strong, and you can see the little bit of a kind of growth there. But you see that, like, more than anything, a prince with the potential to show the way and be someone who can interact well with like Zadia going forward, in terms of you see like that going into the next book, where I guess we're going to be exploring the idea of there's some level of peace between at least humans and like specific parts of Zadia, because we haven't got into like the introduction of like quite a few of the different races of elves. Like, we don't know if it's just that the kind of season 3 ending kind of positivity reflects everything, but Ezran is a good leader to try and present that more positive view of humans going forward. Similarly, I suppose just the kind of general kind of blossoming of relationships between different humans and elf characters as the kind of series progresses is something that's interesting to keep track of. I'd say in book 1 you don't get too much like romance set up, given that Callum Rayla is the main ship. Wouldn't say they do like a particular too much with that, but I think it's fine for now to just focus on the idea of them working together to make this happen. Now, they have a little dragon, and they need to bring this dragon to his mother, and that's where the plot is going to go here for the next 2 books. It's getting that dragon where it needs to be, and along the way, more of the development. This was the friendship put in place, and we can begin to do more with that going forward. Which is fine. Like pacing wise, I think that's all fine, good. What else? I suppose Claudia and Soren is interesting, because I think those are probably some of the more interesting Viren scenes as well. Is that you see Claudia obviously like has aspects that are quite similar to her father, but you can see there's a little bit more kind of like hope for her in a way. But then there is that sense of like she does double down on doing things like him more often than not. But it's both of those scenes where he basically individually tells both of his children what he expects from them on the mission, which is not just to simply find and bring the princes home. It's that like, no, find them and kind of make sure that they're not brought home. So he's effectively telling Soren, take out them if you need to, and that's what we need. That's what the realm needs. And then with Claudia, she asks like a question that seems relatively normal, of just like, what if we're in a situation where like I can either protect the egg or protect Soren? What do I do? And before he answers, she gives him the option to basically not answer the question and just be like, hey, I was just joking, like, ha ha ha, no need to answer that one. And she walks off, but he purposefully makes the decision to answer it when he doesn't have to, and is just like, the egg. And I think that is just a character defining kind of quote from him, of like, as we get to this point where we develop this idea of like the doubt that he will put in the minds of basically like both of his children, and you're kind of thinking like, will it be both of them at the same time, or which one or the other will be the first one to realize that I don't think we should be following our father here. This is not the right thing to do. And in general, I would say, based on just the first season, you probably lean more into the direction of like kind of Claudia might be the one to like realize it sooner, but then it actually ends up more being Soren, which I think is quite interesting what they do there. But that it just highlights that like a lot of the character stuff here is actually quite good. They obviously they're more put on the back burner for most of this book because after say like the first 4-ish episodes, they have to sort of just do enough with the characters to keep them in your mind, but ultimately they can't really come back into things until the start of like season 2. So that's why you only get like relatively brief cutaways to them, you know, finding parts of the spell, activating the spell, and just, you know, it's a fun dynamic because, you know, Claudia is quite quirky, and then with Soren you have the sort of you know, good-hearted but not the most intelligent sort of character, and it's the setup for, okay, when these characters come together, what's actually going to happen? Because obviously Claudia still has that elves equals bad aspect going on. Soren basically does as well. How did they handle this? Because there's also the Amaya scene, which was quite good. That was a really good character introduction. Where she also straight away like attacked Rayla when she saw her. So there's still kind of work to be done there. But then you also have situations where, like, when she tries to get the guy's fire dagger to try and cut off the binding, and I think she does as much as she can to be like, hey, I just want you to try and cut this off, that's all. And even when she leaves and he's aware she's an elf, she's just like, I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to rob you, like, here's your thing back. But he still alerts everyone to the fact that there's an elf in town. So there's still that sense of like, there's quite a long way to go with this. But yeah, I'm excited to get into the development that they do leading up to the relatively like happy ending of book 3 ultimately. And there's a lot that, of course, still has to happen here as we, you know, progress through this. But I think that's most of everything I want to talk about. Obviously there's the whole like coin situation. Like I said before, Runan gets put into a coin, and the implication seems to be that Rayla's parents are also in there from late book 3 stuff, as well as the comic Through the Moon all but confirms it. I don't think it's like one of those things that is directly 100% confirmed, but it feels like that really is the way it has to be, especially because the idea that Rayla like leaves after book 3 to set up why she's sort of absent at the start of book 4 is that she is investigating the potential that Viren is alive, and if she's doing that, I guess she's going to be somewhat on the case of where are Runan, where are my parents as well, and how that all comes out. I suppose the main setup is going to be for like the season 4, like when the two groups of characters meet again. We basically got from the most recent trailer, Rayla does reunite at some point, but it's more of when does the sort of Viren Claudia group meet up with the kind of Callum Rayla group. That's going to be a big point, because Viren and how he interacts with characters like, say, Rayla is going to be very telling to what he is like going forward. But the early trailers for season 4 seem to be suggesting this idea of like, yeah, they're going down the he was manipulated by Aravos idea, and that he might be somewhat sorry for that. So that is quite interesting. Beyond that, like, there's obviously other characters that they do kind of introduce along the way. What's his name? Gren, Amaya's kind of main lieutenant guy. He's quite fun. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I want to say here. The season 1 was definitely something that showed a ton of potential for the show. Like I said, it was so fascinating to see what I felt was a very like universal like opinion on the show. The impression I got was that most people at the very least enjoyed it. Again, most people seem to have some issues with regard to that sort of like animation frame rate smoothness in certain scenes, which they decided was the correct thing to do to correct. And then it feels like the rest of the show just benefits by just getting more episodes, having the kind of stakes be a little higher, the characters kind of, again, coming together a little bit more. In that the start of season 2 is really strong because you get the interaction with, like, again, two groups coming together. In this case, like Claudia and Soren meeting everyone up there on the caldera, while Viren continues his kind of machinations and stuff like that. So really strong going back to it. Definitely has a little bit of the sort of Avatar Book 1 water vibe to it, where there are moments where it feels a little bit maybe more one kind of note, or that, like, you know, you could have made some of these events more important. But given that you're in the process of developing characters, you need episodes like some of the ones that we got here. Just like in Avatar, you need episodes like, you know, The Deserter, like The King of Amashu, where it's a little bit more just on its own, but it allows the characters to shine while you get introduced to sort of characters who are only here for like a little bit, and maybe it is bigger setup for the future. And I think in that sense, you could see that sort of legacy of this show following that same idea, approach, philosophy to storytelling as Avatar does. I'm always going to prefer Avatar to The Dragon Prince, but they're different enough to where, you know, that isn't really a discussion you need to have all that much. So yeah, I'm excited for The Dragon Prince, and I'm also excited to watch the rest. So next week we will review Book 2 Sky. This is how, in a way, like, almost unfamiliar. I'm almost forgetting that. But yeah, I think it's Sky then Sun. Yeah, that's the way it is. And then Book 4 is going to be Earth, which should be pretty exciting. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are heading into Season 4. I suppose specifically looking back on Season 1, what are your thoughts? But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.